Rob, tell us a little bit about Raptor View Research Institute, just to start us off.
All right. Well, Raptor View Research Institute was founded by me 21 years ago. So 21 years ago, I came to Montana 30 years ago, but I wanted to study raptor migration, and I realized nobody was doing that here in Western Montana. So that's what started us. And so that's our specialty. We study migration ecology and ecotoxicology of raptors.
Okay, so let's break that down really quick. So ecotoxicology.
Ecotoxicology is
Tell us what that means.
So an example of ecotoxicology is you take a blood sample from a bird and you run it to see what contaminants might be in the bird. See, raptors feed up here on the food pyramid or the food web. And so animals that are top tier predators often reflect what's going on below them. They're called indicator species. So for example, on the ranch, in the Bitterroot Valley as a whole, we find a lot of eagles have lead in their blood. And so we are able to measure the amount of lead in the blood, measure how many birds have it, and assess the population as a whole for lead poisoning or lead exposure. So that's one example of ecotoxicology. Another example would be heavy metal called mercury, which makes its way through aquatic systems, and it gets into the little invertebrates, the little bugs. The little fish eat them, then the bigger fish eat those. And so in the case of an osprey or a bald eagle, those levels of mercury will magnify. And when you get to the top tier, the bald eagle, which is that's an aquatic predator. They really like fish, unlike golden eagles really don't eat fish, but bald eagles do. So you can sometimes find high levels of mercury in the bald eagles. And unfortunately, bald eagles will scavenge where they get the lead. We'll talk a little bit about that soon. So bald eagles can get like the 1-2 punch of mercury and lead exposure.
So neither thing that you want to have.
Yeah, we don't want that. And there are ways that we can correct for these things. We'll talk about that.
That's great. And then the other one is migration, right?
Yes.
You see the migration of birds.
Migration, because we have all these wintering raptors in the Bitterroot Valley, but where do they come from? We had no idea when we started our work here on MPG Ranch. Where are all these eagles that come down here every year? They show up in November and December, and we see them throughout the valley. Are those locals or are those migrants? And so we started putting transmitters on them. Units like this.
Yeah, so this is what a transmitter.
See, it's got the solar panel.
How does it stay on a bird?
That's a good question. We harness it up with this. This breast patch goes here, and then we strap it on kind of like a backpack style, and then we fit all the pieces together using those little copper ferrules. We just kind of fit it perfectly, so it carries it around in the middle of its back, upper middle, kind of the equivalent of behind your shoulder blades, in between your shoulder blades. And it's real lightweight. It looks kind of big, but when you put it on an eagle, it doesn't look that big. It makes up less than 3% of the total body weight of the eagle. So it carries it around, no problem. And you see that knot in there? That's a stitch. And when the birds pick at that stitch,
got it,
the transmitter will slide off. And so when that happens, we get excited because we get a couple years of important movement data from that individual bird. And then we can recover the transmitter, unless it's on the top of a mountain in Alaska. And we can recover the transmitter and use it again. Other ways, real quick, we use these wing tags for golden eagles that we don't put transmitters on. We have certain birds we select for. We want to look at size and age as it relates to our study. So the goldens will get this. The bald eagles will get these. The reason we put bands on bald eagles and not wing tags, because bald eagles have exposed legs. They don't have feathers that come all the way down to the foot. So we can use these bands, these auxiliary markers, to be able to get information on the bird without having to have it in hand. Finally, because we do have metal bands, I moved them. Oh,
Oh my goodness.
so these, every bird that we capture gets one of these metal bands, and they have a special serial number on them that's unique to the individual bird. These, of course, are eagle bands. You can see how big an eagle leg can be. But some of these bands are teeny tiny, as like a little skinny straw. Those would be for like a sharp-shinned hawk or a kestrel. So raptors come in all shapes and sizes, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But yeah, so all the birds get a metal band, and then we put a transmitter on subset of golden eagles and bald eagles, and then we put those auxiliary mark on. So that's what we're doing here, and we take a blood sample.
Wow. So this is important information too, because right now you have researchers that are here at MPG Ranch, and I just got a message for them. They don't have a bird yet, but they said that the crew is at Partridge Alley, which is just up the road from us, and they are monitoring their work. They have all of their things loaded up, and so they are hoping to catch a bird today. Fingers crossed. If they catch a bird, they are going to bring it here, and you will get to watch Rob and his crew do a workup on that bird. And what will happen is if we get a bird and it's not during this session, we will send an email out and you can hop back on to watch that. So we're really hoping that that's gonna work. But we just don't know.
It could happen any second. They're monitoring. We have cameras. Oops.
We keep getting some sound coming out there. There we go. My goodness. But we have cameras that we can monitor, right?
We have each bait. We use a road-killed deer, and we have a net launcher. We call it a mini net launcher. So it shoots a 10-foot by 10-foot, like soccer goalie net over the eagle. And it shoots it from about 6-7 feet away. So we have a remote control. We look at the eagle on the bait.
We're gonna just disconnect my phone so it doesn't bother us anymore.
Okay.
There we go.
So yeah, and that's the idea. And if we're lucky and we get a nice clean net shot, it'll fall over the eagle, and then the crew has to run through 1.5 feet of snow. And a couple of the baits are really far away. Like, you are winded when you get down there, and then you have to get the eagle out of the net, out of the icy, snowy net, get it in hand. We put a hood on it to cover its eyes up. That helps to calm it down and make it easier for us to handle and make it safer for the bird. And then we will load the bird up, and we'll come here and work on it. And so we've been doing this since 2011.
Wow.
And we have found we've caught hundreds of eagles on the ranch. It's a lot of work. It takes a tremendous amount of people power and hours just to get one eagle. But that one eagle we can learn so much about what's happening in the environment, what's happening with these eagle populations. And over time, we gather all this information, and our data from these eagles is used in scientific publications and in land management, making decisions. So really important stuff when we're talking about these birds that feed atop the food chain. They are the pinnacles.
That's really fantastic. So let's take a look at some of the raptors that you're studying. I have some pictures of them pulled up, and you can tell us a little bit about what each of these birds, like a few facts about each of these birds. And if students have any questions, please feel free to type it in the chat or unmute your microphone and ask. So we're going to start off with one of my favorites. You want to tell us about this guy?
Yeah, so we're looking at a recently wing tagged, and that's a release shot. That's after we had the bird in hand for about an hour. You can see, and we took a whole bunch of measurements. We put wing tags on that bird. Now, if that bird was an adult, we would have put a transmitter on, but because we can tell it's not an adult, it's probably a 2 to 3 year old bird. And you could tell by golden eagle because you could see the white in the tail. And different generations of feathers. So I know just looking at that tail, I could see feathers that were the bird grew the first year of life or the first couple months of life. And then feathers that came in to replace those old feathers. So you get this sort of mosaic of feathers in the tail. Eventually, after about 5 years, that tail will be uniform and definitively plumed, or it won't have any of that white showing. And that's how we can tell adults.
What do golden eagles eat?
Golden eagles are opportunistic feeders, and they have a prey species list that reads like a long scroll. So they can take anything from ground squirrels to magpies to even things as large as foxes, coyotes,
Wow.
pronghorn antelope, skunk. They are incredible predators and, again, opportunistic. They occupy a large landscape. In some cases, these birds are migrating from the northern Alaska on down, even as far as Mexico. And so prey changes. And so, yeah, these birds are on these long migration journeys. A lot of them that we study, not all. Some are local or resident to Montana. We don't know when we capture them whether we're going to have a migrant or a local, so it's kind of like exciting to see what happens, especially in spring when we know the birds are supposed to move back north. And if they don't move back north, then we end up identifying new territories down here. So it's all real interesting and adding to the body of knowledge that we're trying to learn about these birds that tell us a whole lot about what's going on in the ecosystems that support them and that we share with them.
Okay, so during the last session, I learned something that was brand new to me that kind of, well, it blew my mind about golden eagles. And that is how fast they can fly and how fast they can dive.
Yes.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, one of the students in the last session asked how fast can a golden eagle fly? Well, straight flight, just flat out pumping, just a straight flight, they can probably get about 65, 70 miles an hour. Some of the fastest flying straight flight birds are ducks or small ducks. So they can really get moving. They have a lot of muscle in their chest, and they're powerful flyers. But what's really special about them is what they can do when they rise up really high, thousands and thousands of feet up in some cases. And then they dive, and they can dive at 200 plus miles per hour. And that's incredible. And they're able to achieve this speed, which is greater than, let's say, if you went up on a tall skyscraper and you drop a bowling ball, or you go up in a hot air balloon and drop a bowling ball, hopefully nobody's underneath. But the bowling ball is only going to fall so quick. Only terminal velocity, that's called. It's only going to fall so fast. But a golden eagle and some other raptor species, peregrine falcon most notably, they change their shape of their body to be more like a dart, and it creates an airfoil behind the bird, which accelerates the speed. So that's how they can achieve these great speeds diving and to surprise prey. And it's unbelievable if you ever get to see a golden eagle do one of their big dives. You'll be looking at it with your binoculars, and then it starts, you have to keep up because they just start going so fast.
Oh my gosh. Okay, we have a couple questions coming in. We have some more photos, but I'm gonna stop sharing for a minute. We'll go back to Rob, and we'll come back just to answer the questions. So what is the population of golden eagles in Montana?
That is a really great question and a really hard one to answer. In North America, estimated in the West, the estimated population is about, let me see, in the West, I think it's about 60,000.
Okay.
We don't know exactly what we have here in Montana. Golden eagles are very hard to census for, or even index. And those are two words. Census is an exact number. Index is an estimate. But the reason they're so difficult is because they often nest in remote, hard to access areas. We used to think golden eagles just nested on prominent cliffs, but we now know they will nest in trees, in the forest, in areas. So unlike bald eagles, which build big nests in trees right along the river where we can easily census for, Golden eagles are really tough. So we are trying to help learn how many golden eagles there are. I think at one time I heard of an estimated of 700 nesting pair of adult uh, golden eagles in Montana, but these numbers are kind of abstract, and it's not a census. It's not exact.
Yeah.
Because we just don't know. Very good question.
Well, and in a few minutes, what we'll do is we'll also look at Raptor Tracker, which is a really cool tool that Rob and his team use, and that I've sent information about that to your teacher, so you can take a look at it too. But we'll take a look at some of the eagles and other raptors that have transmitter data, and you can see where they go and where they migrate to. So that'll be good in just a few minutes. A few more questions first. Let's see. What is the territory radius of a gold? Actually, maybe we should show this right now. What is the territory radius of a golden eagle?
This is very good. Now, this is interesting. So what I will do is I'm going to say nesting territory.
Okay.
That's a great question.
Yep.
And the radius of in general, nesting territory radius is usually about 2.5 to 3 miles. Because when they're, for the females, males will have a little wider radius, usually about 3.5 to 4 miles, because he is going to be out hunting when the female, the larger, more powerful of the two birds, is going to be on the nest or taking care of the young. So the male will range wider radius. This is good. I mean,
this is great. So we're going to take a look at, we'll look at two birds here. The first bird is Aurora, right?
Yes. And I want you guys to look at this. Now, there's two ways of looking at this. We have a core territory, which is sort of the donut hole
right in
of
here.
a larger territory. Now you see the way this bird's steering clear of the populated area, the floodplain. Yeah, this area here, this bird's steering clear of. Golden eagles are more mountainous. They like steep terrain. They're much more secretive and shy than bald eagles. Our bald eagle territories are all on the floodplain. But you can see this golden eagle's core territory, and if we put that on Google, I know I have, it's about a 2.5 mile to 3 mile radius.
Just so folks know sort of where we are. So this is MPG Ranch. This is Missoula, Montana. This is Lolo, Montana. We had a class that was right over here in the last session. I bet though, if we go really detailed, you'll start to see even more points pop out. And let's see, is there any spot, Rob, that looks like it could be a potential nest site to you?
Yes, we have confirmed nesting of Aurora. Now, Aurora was a bird that we originally caught when she was a subadult. And so we had wing tags on her. We recaptured her. We had encounters, we had sightings of her wing tags, and we recaptured her and we put a transmitter on, and then we learned exactly where she nests. And it's kind of right in the middle of the screen there.
Is this it, right? I was going to say, this had so many data points. And that's one way that you can look using Raptor Tracker, is looking at all of these data points. Okay, so we had Aurora. Now let's take a look at, I'm going to choose a different one this time. I feel like we've looked at this guy. Oh, nope, that was another single. Oh, I'm choosing all of the ones that are not migrating, it looks like.
And you know, there's a difference between our migratory birds. Our migratory birds are more likely to suffer mortalities than our local birds, because they're traveling thousands of miles, and on those migration journeys they encounter lots of risks, lots of things that the local birds don't have to deal with. Migration, there are inherent risks with migration.
So here we have, this is Admiral, and Admiral likes to spend his summers up in Alaska.
This looks like Admiral is very near the Kenai Peninsula.
It does. So we can zoom in a little bit closer, and oh my goodness. Yeah, this is Admiral's territory right here. And Admiral will come back up in a second once.
It's interesting how Admiral seems to avoid the very, very high peaks and just makes his way around the interior with all those lakes. and then around the Gulf side, but is not crossing over those mountains a lot, which it can, but it's probably looking for food, and best hunting is going to be in those areas where you see those tracks.
That's pretty incredible. So this is a really wonderful tool that you can use to explore raptors. We have so many more questions, so I'm going to go back to those, and we can always come back to that. Does the transmitter hurt the bird, or what happens if it does hurt the bird?
Oh, that's a great question. We have been doing this for a long time, and we have always taken great care in putting our transmitters on. These transmitters are set up to break away. If the bird picks at that stitch, that's a cotton stitch with some glue on it, but if they pick at that, these 4 straps break away and the transmitter slips off. The other thing we have is these little elastic pieces in here. And that gives flexibility. If the bird loses weight or gains weight, the transmitter doesn't rub on the back. Now, we have recaptured a lot of our eagles over the years, and we are really proud to say that upon recapture, the eagles look great. There's no effect of the transmitter. There's no harness wear, which, like if it got sore spots, we've never found that. We've had numerous birds drop the transmitters like we plan after a couple of years, and so we get a couple of years of great movement data, and then they lose the tracking unit and they're set free of it. And the only thing they'll have on their legs left from us would be the metal band, the USGS metal band, US Geologic Survey, Fish and Wildlife Service serial number band. That they'll carry for life. But that's a great question, and we have never found any evidence of that. But it's a very particular process putting these transmitters on, and we're extremely careful when we do it.
That's great. Do you know how birds get lead in them?
That's a really good question. We do know how birds get lead in them. What we have found over the years, we and other researchers, what first brought the whole lead issue to light with golden eagles was California condors. California condors are facultative or obligate scavengers. They have to feed on dead things. Golden and bald eagles are facultative in that they will take it when it's available, but they don't rely on it. Nonetheless, when people are out there hunting with lead core rifle bullets, when they shoot an elk, for example, that rifle bullet explodes inside the animal. And lots of over 350 little tiny pieces of lead can make their way into the meat and the gut. So when a hunter takes the gut, the stuff that people don't eat, and leave it on the landscape, the eagles and the coyotes and the foxes and the ravens come to eat that gut, and they get the lead in them. They don't even know they're eating it. Some of those pieces are so small.
That's a great question. Thank you. What is the oldest bird that you have tagged?
That's a great question. Okay, let me go back. But the answer to fix that problem is that hunters just use copper. And there's lots of really good copper bullets out there that hunters are making a switch to. And we're starting to see lead levels coming down a little bit. So the oldest bird we ever tagged, there's a couple ways of answering that. We can only tell the age of the bird up to 5 or 6 years old, because after that, it doesn't change anymore. The plumage tells us if it's 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, but by the time it gets to 5 years, all that plumage is going to be called definitive plumage, which means it doesn't change anymore. So we could be looking at a 5 or 6 year old bird or a 50-year-old bird. So, but what we have found is some of the birds that we've captured, we then, if we put a wing tag on them, did I show you guys the wing tags?
Yeah.
Yeah, like these wing tags. We had one that we caught, and it was 4 years old, and then 14 years later, it was spotted alive and well in a completely different area than where we captured it. So we learned about movement, and then we learned that that bird was like 18 years old. Bands, if a bird is carrying one of those and somebody finds it, let's say it was electrocuted or it just died of old age. Most of these birds don't die of old age, by the way. It's a risky world out there. And then somebody finds the bird and has that metal band on that number, they report that to the bird banding lab, which oversees all these. This is where us researchers get these bands. And then we can get a longevity estimate. And so for eagles, both bald and golden eagles, mid-30s is the oldest that we have found with the bands. But we believe that they could be even 60 years old in the wild.
Wow.
If they somehow can make that live that long.
Okay. Have any of your birds ever gotten out of the traps, and did you find them again?
Yes, sometimes it's really hard catching eagles, and it can be very frustrating. Sometimes if we shoot the net over them, they can, we call it swimming out, where they duck their head under and they get out, and it's like, ah. Or in the case of Aurora, we recapture Aurora. She had wing tags originally. We recaptured her. We took the wing tags off and we put a transmitter on her. And so, yes, recaptures in our business is rare, but it happens. It's often very exciting because you have a banded bird. Whether it's our own bird that we captured, or maybe a biologist in Alaska is banding baby eagles in the nest, and then we capture one of those. That can be really fun because we know where the bird came from. And then if we put a transmitter on that bird, we can then track it back and see, is it going to be what we call natal fidelity, where it was born? Does it go back to that area or does it not? And so all these little pieces to the puzzle help to give us a good vision of what's happening with golden eagles in their natural history or their behavior and their populations as a whole.
Oh my gosh. How often do you catch a bird?
In the fall, on fall migration, we can, with conditions being optimal, we can catch everything from the little sharp-shinned hawks on up to golden eagles. And we can catch 14, 15 birds in a day. Winter trapping is really, really challenging, and there's lots of things that can go wrong, and it's much more difficult. So if we catch a bird a week, that's great. Sometimes we'll catch 5 in a week. Sometimes we won't catch anything for 2 weeks. So it's very, very challenging. There's lots that can go wrong. And right now we have a ton of snow out there. The crew was out really early this morning. They put all the traps back out after the weekend. And so, yeah, that's a really good question. We could catch one today. That's our goal. Every day we're here.
That is so very cool. Okay. How long? Oh, let's see. This is a big question. Why do some birds migrate and others don't?
Oh, that's a great question.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Well, migration is an interesting behavior, and let's see if I can narrow it down. For eagles, for example, there's sort of a cutoff line for migration. So if you imagine North America, the map of North America, then you look up into British Columbia and Alberta, Canada. Right around the 50th parallel, so right about mid-level of Canada is sort of that cutoff line for migration.
So you're looking somewhere
right about in there. So everything below that line generally does not migrate, and everything above that line summers north and then migrates down here. This is
wow.
Now, why that behavior starts may be related to the last ice age. And when we lost our last glacier period, because we had a big old glacier that separated the lower part of North America, the U.S., and northern Canada. It was a long time ago. It was temperate back in the woolly mammoth and mastodon days. So as that glacier receded, started getting colder up there in the summer. We started getting more seasonal. So that's what we think created this separation. So these birds that evolved to migrate now, because they have to leave those northern areas, and this is over thousands of years this behavior has developed. So they leave those northern areas because they get really cold and dark, and they have to come down here to survive. Birds that never were up there, that were separated by that last glacier period, those birds were down here in the lower 48. They never had to migrate. They never had to leave, so they stay here. So same species of bird, markedly different behavior. And we've been able to identify that behavior in their DNA.
Wow.
You could identify markers in their genetics that will tell them that you could tell now, oh, these are migratory, these are not migratory.
That's incredible. So Aurora, when we looked at, we can pull her back up just to remind everybody. Aurora, who we saw that just kind of hangs around,
Yep.
she was probably here
Yeah.
before the last ice age.
Her relatives were here. Yeah. Yeah, she'd be old. Yeah, but you're right. Yes, her relatives are descendant of the ones that were south of the last big glaciers. It's a really interesting. It's a great question. And you can imagine when you have to fly thousands of miles from summer range, from these beautiful summer ranges in Alaska and northern Canada, and then you have to migrate down to the lower 48 where we have lots of roads, we have power lines that can electrocute them, we have cars that could hit them. There's just a lot of risk factors down here that they don't have up in their northern part of the range. So some of these birds come from these beautiful areas where they don't even see a person their whole life during the summer, and then they have to come down here. And not only do they have to survive, but they have to survive with the locals. So they're on this one, but the food down here makes it worth the investment to migrate. So
Wow.
yeah, that's a great question.
That is a real, and you know what? What's interesting is that, is this newer information that you've been learning, or have you known this for a long time?
It's a theory.
It's a theory.
But it's pretty for the golden eagles
Yeah.
anyway. But there's other types of migration. There's like reverse migration where birds might migrate north for the summer. But let's see, we've had, for example, this is kind of crazy. We've had eagles, we've had bald eagles in Southern California that have showed up on our cameras here in the winter.
Oh.
So they're coming up here, even though it's warmer and yeah, so there's a lot we don't understand. We don't understand. We're trying to learn. Yeah, and that's why we're trying to answer these questions. That's a really good question.
These are great. We have so many good questions. How long have you ever kept a bird?
The longest I've ever kept a bird was 24 hours or less than. We are allowed by our permits to keep a bird for 24 hours if we have to. So only one time in 20 years of doing this did we caught the bird really almost dark. It was almost dark, and so we wanted to put a transmitter on it. This is years ago. This wasn't on MPG Ranch. And somebody asked about, does the transmitter ever hurt the bird? Or so we had, back then, I was not an expert at putting transmitters on, so I wanted to go meet my expert who was living in Wyoming. And so we met halfway. We took the eagle out of the enclosure that we were carrying it in, and we put the transmitter on and we put it back in the enclosure, but now it's dark, so we waited till morning to release it. And the bird was great, and we tracked it for a couple of years before we recovered the transmitter.
All right. This question, do you have any birds on video? Yes, and we'll send them to you because we have some great video footage for you. Yeah, really great. And in fact, there's a link in some curriculum that I sent to the teachers. And if you follow those links, you'll find all sorts of videos that have footage of the trapping, Rob and his crew at work, the birds. So I will resend that out later too. Okay, have you ever caught a sick or injured bird?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have caught birds that were so sick that we had to take them to a rehabber or a bird doctor, a wildlife doctor. One we caught couldn't fly. We didn't know it couldn't fly when we captured it, and we found that it had a bunch of holes in it. So it might have been in a fight with another eagle and had some infections. So that bird we brought back, we took it in, we released it, it couldn't fly. We're like, oh, something's wrong. It's hard to tell sometimes. And so we brought that to the rehabber. It spent a couple weeks with the rehabber, and then it was fine to fly again. We've caught them with very damaged legs, where it had been caught in a wolf trap or a coyote trap, one of those steel traps. that closes on their leg and creates a bad infection. The only thing we think of is when the trapper shows up to check their traps, they see the eagle in there and they just let it go. Instead of taking it and getting a hold of people like us so we can give the bird proper care, they let it go. Maybe the leg is too damaged at that point. We've had to euthanize a couple of birds that we found like that, where their legs were just destroyed.
Oh, that's pretty
Yeah,
sad.
and we don't know it. They come to our bait. We've had other eagles severely lead poisoned when we got them, and we can tell that they're sick because they have a lot of parasites. They can't clean the feather lice off of them. So yeah, that does happen sometimes. That's a good question.
Have you ever captured somebody else's bird that was already tagged?
Now that's like gold for us. We love that. When we get a banded bird, that's amazing. So we call it a foreign recapture, when we capture somebody else's birds. And yes, it has happened. It's rare, but when it happens, it's very exciting. So we've captured, there is a golden eagle biologist up in Alaska. His name is Travis Booms. And we captured 2 of his birds that were banded as nestlings. And we captured one of them here on MPG Ranch, and it was right around Christmas, and we wanted to know if we could put a transmitter on it, because now we have what's known as a known origin bird. This bird is a young bird, and we know it was banded in a nest, so put a transmitter on it, and will it go back to its nesting area? Will it go to a completely different area? Big question we didn't have an answer to. So we were able to track down Travis, because if we catch a banded bird, that's a bird with just a metal band, and there's a status on that bird. It's called a 300. Because it's not our bird, we can't change the status unless we talk to the researcher who banded it. So we got a hold of Travis. It was amazing because it was right around Christmas, and he was living in Alaska, but somehow, because of our network, we were able to make some calls. We got a hold of Travis. He said, yes, by all means, put a transmitter on it. So we put a transmitter on that bird, and we tracked that bird for a couple of years.
Wow.
And that was really cool. But then that bird got caught in a trap, in a snare, trap in British Columbia that unfortunately the bird died.
Wow. Just a quick follow-up question. Is it easy to tell, especially with maybe those wing tags or the color bands, if it's somebody else's bird?
And it all depends to what you capture, because I started to talk about it. We had birds from Southern California, the Catalina Islands. They were camera captured because we put a trail cam on all of our dead deer, our baits. And sometimes a bird will show up with a band or a transmitter, and so that's not ours. That's really cool. So that's like a camera trap, but that's still really neat.
It's not yours.
Different color.
Oh, different color.
Yeah, these are our colors.
Those are your colors.
These are specific to only Raptor View. So nobody else is using this color wing tag or these color bands. So royal blue with white alphanumerics, that's us. And so if we get an orange wing tag, we're like, that's not us. But we could figure out pretty quick, because of all the communication and all the connections that we have, where that bird came from. So every now and then we get a big surprise like that.
Okay, if students are interested in finding opportunities to get involved with researching eagles, and this is high school to college specifically that's asking this, how would they do that?
They really should reach out to us.
Okay.
Yeah, you can reach out to us if you're in our area. In the fall, we work near Lincoln, Montana, if you're in Montana, or near White Sulphur. In the winter, we're of course working in Florence, Montana. But in the summer, we're doing osprey work, and there's lots of things kids and young people could do to get involved, to learn about being a wildlife biologist and a raptor specialist.
They're in Illinois, so it might be a little tricky.
They're in Illinois, but there's people doing it there too. So you have to do a little bit of homework and find out who's doing the raptor work in your area. A good place to start is look for places where migration hawk counts are going on.
Mm.
Because in the fall, raptors follow set routes, and I know there's areas through Illinois. These areas where raptors concentrate when they're migrating south. And these are areas that typically we call bottlenecks in the migration. And so there's almost certainly a fall migration, and even a spring migration hawk count near where you can meet raptor biologists and get involved and just learn how to identify the different raptor species just by general impression, shape, and size, and learn about migration ecology. That's how I got started. I got started just hanging out on a hawk watch and watching the birds fly by. It's really cool, and you can help the researchers, and you learn a lot about migration ecology and telling different species apart.
Well, and I think one of the things that I've heard you say is that a lot of information comes from citizen science. And so citizen
Yeah.
science is when somebody who is not necessarily a researcher, might be somebody who spots a bird, takes an interest, sees that there's a wing tag or a leg band, looks up that information, and then gets in touch with the researcher. And you learn so much about birds when people do that.
We couldn't do the work we do. The re-sightings of our birds wouldn't be possible without citizen scientists. I was a citizen scientist at one time. That's even the other day I was in Missoula and I was looking at what I couldn't tell was either a sharp-shinned hawk or a Cooper's hawk. I could not tell. And if I can't tell, it's hard. And that bird had a band on it. And it only had the metal band. And I was trying to get a look at that band so hard, but I just couldn't. I had my spotting scope. I was running across the road. But if I wanted that number so bad, because if I could get that number, it would have opened up so much information about that bird. So yeah, if you ever see a banded bird or a wing-tagged bird, any banded bird,
Yep.
because researchers are banding birds, everything from hummingbirds on up to eagles, all across the country. So you find a banded bird, that's like the gold ticket.
That's amazing. Okay, this is our final question because we are out of time, and I want to give Rob a little break. What is your favorite bird?
Ooh, okay, that's really hard. I guess they're all great, by the way. They're all great in their own ways. Every one of them. Birds are incredible marvels of adaptation and evolutionary changes. So I love them all. But as far as if I had to pick a favorite, I probably would have to pick the golden eagle.
Yep. All right. Rob, thank you so much. And
Thank
thank
you.
you to everybody for these incredible questions. My goodness. All right. We'll see you next time. And like I said, if we catch a bird, I'll send out an email today. All right. Goodbye, everybody.